you're all right.
It was all this way, but
Do we need to hold the microphone?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Oh, we do?
Yes, sir. All righty, welcome to this week's edition of Eggs and Issues. Well, we have three awesome guests here today. We have Holly Brink, we have Dustin Height, and Senator Ken Rosenboom. We'd like to thank Smoky Row and Midwest One for the coffee this morning. Looking forward to the day that we can enjoy that inside Smoky Row. I'd like to thank Andy and Allison McGuire. They're back there helping feed questions to us. So send us your questions via the live stream, and we'll try and get them asked here. I'd like to thank the Mahaska Chamber and Penn Central Mall, Oskaloosa News, and KIC. This is their studio, and we'd like to thank everybody for helping us with this. So this week has been funnel week. Lots of things, I'm sure, pushing on you guys, so we'll move forward with that. If you guys want, we'll go ahead and start with introductions.
Well, good morning, everyone. I take it this mic's on, Ken.
Yes, sir.
I can't. Okay. Good morning. Thanks for joining us this morning. This, I think, was the 7th week of the legislature, a time of the year for us anyway that goes extremely fast. And I didn't prepare a lot to talk about up front other than to mention school funding has been established. I think there's a piece of that yet we need to work on. But our schools should know what their numbers are going into the budget process for them. I've personally been working on a couple things that I really didn't expect to work on so much this year, the bottle bill and dealing with what I consider to be overpopulation of deer in the state of Iowa. So I could talk about those things if anybody wants to talk about them later on. But with that, I'll turn it over to my colleagues.
yeah, it's week 7. It's definitely been a busy week for all of us. Still working through mainly our committee assignments, but debates are definitely happening on the floor. We had a variety this week of, I'm sure you guys have all heard, so I'm looking forward to your questions.
Good morning. Ken stole my thunder with school funding. Being chair of the Education Committee, that's my wheelhouse, Ken. So thanks for taking that. We established SSA this year at an extra $36 million, 2.4%. The governor signed it into law last week. The House has passed off the floor $27.2 million worth of new one-time COVID funding to help schools with those added costs of in-person learning. In addition, just kind of one of those things that kind of would throw out there is in the Iowa House Judiciary Committee, we are reconsidering that felon voting amendment. And so that's something that maybe be flying under the radar, but that's coming up. So look forward to questions this morning.
All righty. Well, we have one already. It's from Catherine Call Goodman, and she asks, what is your position on House File 496, Senate File 41, that would make Iowa the only state in the country to eliminate tenure for professors at public universities?
So thanks for that question, Catherine. That came at least House File 46 came out of Education Committee this year. And, kind of the impetus behind it is what we're seeing at the Regents universities with the professor at Iowa State basically saying, if you like to write about conservative viewpoints, you're out of my class, to the dental school dean bringing in a student who disagreed with the dental school dean's condemnation of the Trump administration. And so, it's a bill that certainly has started a conversation of what is the actual role of our Regents universities and why are they doing this? And so, as we look at that simply eliminating may not be the answer. Certainly open to conversations on that, but it certainly has gotten the attention of the Regents, which is the purpose.
Well, thanks for the question, Catherine. Dustin touched on some of the driving force behind those bills, and I want to go back actually a year, almost exactly a year ago. I was on a subcommittee that dealt with political bias seeping into grading grades for students. And in that meeting, the college establishment denied that ever took place. It just didn't happen. And I was assured of that several times. And then we saw those egregious violations of constitutional rights and for our students take place at all three of our region universities after that. So I was assigned to, I think you said, I think it's Senate File 41, the 10-year bill in the Senate. I was assigned to be on that subcommittee. I was glad to do that because I got to have the exact same people in the room that I had a year ago, who all said there's no problem, who denied there was any bias on campus. And it gave me an opportunity to remind them a year later how things had changed. And so, in my own mind, Catherine, I think removing tenure is a bridge too far. But we certainly needed to have the conversation. We've started the conversation, and I know Representative Brink has some strong feelings in this as well. So I have to give credit where credit's due. I think our university presidents have stepped up, knowing that there was egregious violations, and I think the Board of Regents has stepped up. But we're going to keep our eye on that because we can't have a repeat of what happened this year.
Yes, I obviously, Chair of Government Oversight, if anybody has watched some of the hearings that I've been, a part of, this is definitely a serious problem, and it is happening more than people can even imagine. I have had letters from all three Regent universities from students, and perfect examples of this exact thing. And so, with the tenure bill, it brings out a conversation. We have to find a solution. Dustin talked about the syllabus, but how about there was a teacher at Iowa State that also put a student's picture up on the board and said bigot across it in front of a class that he wasn't even in because it was a difference of opinion. A professor at the University of Iowa that said, I want you to write an essay about your favorite president, and if you write Trump, I will fail you. Letter after letter, email, please don't use my name has been a very big part of this because these kids are so scared of their grades. I can dig through my email. It wouldn't take me but 2 seconds to find a slew of these. And so this is happening, and it's happening on all levels. And so I think, we all need to be paying attention to this and looking at this, and we've got to find a solution. Is this one of the reasons that, education could be getting so expensive as well? Some of the things that are required for these students that really don't even have to do with their degrees. That started to become in question as well. From some outside sources. And so we are really looking to this, and we're going to continue some conversations about it.
All right. Well, we have a question here from Kurt Keogh. Can you talk about what problems were solved with the election rules changes that passed?
Well, there were several pieces of that, and I don't sit on state government, so I don't remember all the details. One thing that comes to mind is we did an election law change a year earlier, and in Iowa we had 3 county auditors that very defiantly, very brazenly ignored state law and sent out pre-populated absentee ballot request. That wasn't an accident. It was very intentional, and it took the court process to block them from doing that. So there seems to, and of course we've become very aware of voting issues around the country. Iowa's known for a state that has good election law, but after last year, both within the state and outside the state, there are reasons to take a look at that and tighten that up, because we always want voting to be easy and cheating to be hard.
Yeah, so again, Iowa elections went really well this past year, but I think we would be doing voters a disservice if we didn't look at our election laws every so often and see what we can do to make them better. For instance, this bill actually authorized the use of drop boxes. That wasn't authorized before, but made sure the use of those drop boxes, that they're going to be secure in a government location and emptied on a regular basis so that they are secure. Those sorts of things. Again, we just constantly have to look at our election law to make it better.
And just kind of with what they said, elections are important. We had very few incidences this year, but again, we want to make sure for the future and anything we can do to continue to have election integrity, we want to make sure we do that because your votes do matter. And we do want to make sure for the people of Iowa that their votes count and it's clean law, so we don't have any of that questionable stuff. So we cleaned up a few things and just made sure that was the best we could for this right now.
And I'd like to make one last point, if I could. Every time we bring up a voting bill, we hear the term voter suppression thrown out indiscriminately. But we've had the highest turnout ever. We were told this same thing in the last time we dealt with election law. But yet we had the highest voter turnout ever. So that after a while, those boy crying wolf, it falls on deaf ears because I think we have great law in Iowa and we have great voter turnout, and this will do nothing but ensure voter turnout, but with integrity.
All right, and I have a follow-up from Catherine on the tenure question. She says, do you have any concerns about how this would impact... Let me see. Let me find it again here. We had a message come in. Do you have any concerns about how this would impact recruiting highly qualified researchers, scientists, and scholars to our state universities when they could go to any other state and have tenure?
Well, that certainly is an argument against it. I would point out, however, that our community colleges don't have tenure, and I think our community colleges are staffed with great faculty and great staff that teach our students. Again, that's one of the things that I think we've started to have that discussion is what is the point of our Regents institutions? Is it to make a name for these professors and everything, or is it to teach students? And so, that's the conversation. Everything that we do has trade-offs, and so that's certainly something we're going to look at, Catherine. But again, I would point out our community colleges do not have tenure, and they are staffed with great faculty.
That's an obvious objection that's thrown up to this, and I understand it, and I certainly understand the concept. But as I said at the subcommittee meeting, there are things in America that are more important than dollars and cents. And if we are going to deny students freedom of speech, freedom of expression, we're going to have that discussion first before we consider the dollars and cents.
Just, tenure actually started in Iowa, if you research it, and it's a really interesting story during World War II with the Iowa State University. Again, this is a conversation. We need to continue this conversation. We need to protect students and free speech and several different issues. So we are going to continue to have the conversation. But like Dustin said, we have amazing professors in the state of Iowa that don't have tenure. And they continue to do an amazing job every day. And so we just need to look at the situation as a whole.
Alrighty, and we have a question from Marilyn Isley. Is legalizing marijuana in Iowa on the agenda?
It's not on my agenda.
That has not been a conversation that I think has come up in the House this year. And I without going into detail, I believe that I have some of the same concerns that Ken has regarding it.
All right. So we have one from Susie Cord. And this is for each of you to respond to. Do you believe in local control for cities and school boards? Why or why not?
So I think to a certain degree, yes, but we also have to make sure that local control are listening, which true local control is a parent's choice if you're talking about your school, your school board. Otherwise, you're talking about citizens, of course. And I think it's important that we listen to them and actually give them a chance to be heard. I'm assuming this kind of goes to some of my government oversight hearings and the one that's coming up with the Ames Public School. Numerous parents, teachers had heavy concern about what was going on, and they were not heard. And so I think that we do need to do that, and it is important. However, we need to make sure that there are ways for them to truly be heard so the local control of the parents is followed out.
Well, we also heard that concern expressed with the discussion on requiring landlords to use the Section 8 housing funds. And we had, I think, three municipalities in Iowa that were forcing land or property owners, landlords, to offer that to their tenants. And local control, the state telling those municipalities they couldn't do that was interpreted to be unfriendly towards local control. My question is, what's more local control than a private landowner simply doing what he wishes with his property? That is local control.
So, Susie, I think it's a balance. Certainly in favor of local control, mayor of a small city, but on the same token, cities and counties and local school districts have to follow the law, have to follow the Constitution, and when they don't, I think that it certainly is appropriate for the legislature to come in and make sure that they do.
All right. And I have a question here from Tiffany Brummel. Why are the roads in Iowa so bad, and what is being done to improve our infrastructure?
Well, for the first time, I'm on the transportation committee, so I can maybe actually take a look at some of that stuff. However, I was around in Iowa as a county supervisor a few years ago, and when I went to the Senate, we had the discussion about raising the gas tax 10 cents a gallon. A move that hadn't been made for nearly 40 years. And I think we all recognized that Iowa's roads needed help. I reluctantly turned eventually to favor that vote, and I voted for it. I don't know that Iowa's roads are significantly different than any other state. We have, everybody can name a road that's bad, right? I can name 202 down in the south part of my district that's frankly horrible. But interesting question, not an uncommon complaint. I guess I have to leave it there.
Well, I think there's a lot of different parts to this. We have, there's budget issues. There's the amount of, traffic that we do have when roads were built way back. It wasn't necessary to be drove on as much as we have, or have some of the, I totally lost that, but the amount of times you drive, but the expense of it to fix it. You're talking $1 million a mile to fix that. We do need to continue to move forward, but the budget is a huge issue. The RIF budget, which is gas tax and gambling, it took a huge hit this year during COVID. I mean, nobody was gambling unless you were doing Chinese table tennis. I think that was the only thing you really could do, and a lot of people weren't driving, and so it took another hit on the budget. We can only piece the budget together, the amount of money. We have so many different ways, and we're trying to do it the best we can. I'm not on transportation, but I do know the budget side of it, and so you can only cut the pie so many ways. And when we have, estimated revenue increases and other budgets are having to pull more money because they need it, we have to find ways to shift everything else. And so I think that's one of the biggest concerns. I mean, the roads are bad because we don't necessarily have the full budget. They did the 10 cents, but we need to continue to look for some different solutions, and I do know that we are working on that.
All right, so I have a lengthy question here from Mayor Dave Creutzfeld, so hang with me, and hopefully if you have any other follow-up or okay, Ken, what are you talking about? Just holler out at me. So it says Senate File 479 and HSB 230 prohibit local entities from receiving state funds if the entity has reduced the law enforcement budget under its control, unless the reduction is part of a total budget reduction, or unless the entity has sufficient jurisdiction for doing so as determined by the Iowa Department of Management. With a recent court decision, Oskaloosa will be looking at options to pay for emergency services, and a reduction in our police budget may be part of the solution. It appears that the state is injecting itself in a local decision and through the threat impending local control. Do you have an opinion on these proposals?
So, Mayor Creutzfeld, I'm not positive where that is coming from. I believe that the bill itself is an answer to the call to defund the police. And so, but I think your point is well taken, that that's certainly a concern. And it would be a concern that I would have that, again, are there unintended consequences for that? And I, like I said, I don't know where the bill is at in the process. I heard that it was out there. I think that that's why it's there. Certainly not to try to impede what like the city of Oskaloosa has to do with the 911 decision. But yeah, certainly your point is well taken.
And Mr. Mayor, I too, I know there's something out there that I had heard about. I've not heard anything more recently. And maybe the public, a good time to remind the public, sometimes bills get filed to make a statement. They're really not, don't have a chance of being passed. And I don't know if this is one of these bills, but it's sure, when I first heard about it, and now as you describe it, it seems like one of those bills that's a statement bill.
All righty, here we go. And this one is a follow-up to the marijuana question earlier. So why wouldn't legalizing marijuana be on the agenda with the revenue other states are making off of it? So anybody want to tackle that?
Well,
one?
again, I'll elaborate on my previous answer. When I said I have supported a lot of medical marijuana legislation, I think I've supported everything we've done since I've been up there. I presume the question to be about recreational marijuana. And again, I would answer that in the same way I answered an earlier question. It's not all about money. My goodness, the health effects on young children that would inevitably suffer from legalizing recreational marijuana is something that I think would be totally irresponsible. As a parent, as a grandparent, I have no desire. I don't care what revenue other states are collecting. We're inheriting a lot of Illinois' problems. Illinois is so desperate for money that they needed a new tax source, which is why they've legalized it, in my view. They're also shipping a lot of their problems across the border, across the river to us. So no, I have no interest in that recreational marijuana, and frankly never will.
Well, and to piggyback on what Ken says, when we hear from law enforcement and we hear from other government officials from those states that have taken that step, I don't think it's all smooth sailing. And so I think there's a lot of concerns about that, about what Ken's talking about, and some of the other ill effects that I don't know that would be good for Iowa.
And just the same, I voted for the medical marijuana bill. I support medical marijuana recreation. There's been a lot of concerns that we have heard from other states, and I just think that the revenue versus the problems are not where we need to be.
All right, we have a question here from Eric Palmer, and he asks, what problems are the proposed changes to the Iowa election law going to solve with a record turnout in Iowa this election? Are you just joining your fellow Republicans' efforts nationwide to suppress the vote?
Well, Eric, we missed you last time, so it's good to have you back. Again, we are looking at our election laws, and I think we should do that every so often. Just because I didn't have a car accident yesterday doesn't mean that I don't wear a seatbelt today. And when we look at it, again, we're making things more consistent, making the ending of polling times consistent with all of our elections, making sure that, again, those ballot drop boxes are legalized but are secure. All of those things that I think we need to look at and continue to work on. Again, I would remind everybody, the early voting. We are still above the national average for the days for early voting. Our times of poll closing is still later than the national average and later than all of our surrounding states. So this idea of voter suppression is bogus. We heard that 2 years ago, as Ken said, and we had record turnout.
Well, and I'll follow up again, Eric, with my comment about the 3 auditors that were defiant about breaking state law. That took intervention of the courts, taxpayer money to do that. Created an awful lot of voter confusion in those areas, and as Dustin pointed out, the earlier voting poll closing time, is something that the auditors have been asking for many years. So there were several pieces to this, but I think it's good law.
All right, we have a question from Lorraine Sinnott. When shortening the absentee ballot time frame, what considerations were made concerning the impact on county auditors, their staff, and additional staff expenses that might be incurred?
Well, Lorraine, I understand your question, and it's a fair question, and I know it's a burden on auditors. But the bottom line, election voter integrity is at the very heart of our democracy. And we have to make trade-offs there as well. And we know by experience, looking at situations in other states, how voting can be adulterated, how cheating can be done. And we're just going to have to do what it takes to maintain voter integrity in Iowa.
All right, we have a question from Mike Strasko. Pardon me if I'm not pronouncing names correctly. I'm doing what we can here. So he asks, with the overwhelming disapproval of the school vouchers and charter schools for profit, do you support this legislation, even though it's clear Iowans do not want this?
Well, I think this is a few different things. In the House, we actually broke the governor's bill up into multiple parts. Most people notice Senate file is at
69.
160, yeah. And so we broke it up in several different parts. We have the scholarship is a section. We have the charter schools, the diversity piece, and then multiple things about open enrollment and IT stuff. So there's a lot of different parts. When it does come to the Students First Scholarship Program, I think a lot of people do have some misinformation out there, and so I have encouraged everybody to actually look into it. We need to understand that it's only the 34 failing schools or underperforming schools that are in our state. There's none that actually really are in my district that are going to be involved in that. The other side of it is it also allows them to go to an online school. It's not just a voucher system like everybody believes. It's not everybody gets all the money, they can go to a private school. There's a lot of different parts to it. It's a certain portion of the funding. The other funding would stay with the school. I'm not saying that I'm going to support it, but I do encourage people to make sure that they actually have all of the knowledge that goes behind it to understand the full bill, because everyone just keeps saying it's a voucher, and that's not really what it is. And so I've been focusing on multiple parts of that bill and not necessarily the Students First section, the scholarship section. But I do know the concerns, and I have a lot of people reaching out to me on that, and I completely am taking everything from the district and what everyone's saying, and I will be voting with my constituents.
A couple of comments. There's a lot to talk about, but I want to start with your assertion that overwhelming support. I don't agree with that sentiment. I know what I read in the newspapers. I know what you read in the newspapers, and I know what the teachers union says. I get that. That does not equate to overwhelming support. I hear many voters in my district that frankly disagree with that sentiment. To the point that Holly made, one of the things, and this was a union-generated email blast that came out to a lot of us. Often, they were talked about $50 million going to 10,000 students. That was repeated time and time and time again. It's simply not true. It wasn't true a month ago when I refuted that, and it's not true today. Let's change the discussion from the pejorative term voucher program to what the bill's really about, and that is to reach out to those kids, those children, many of them poverty-stricken, that are trapped in failing schools. That's what this bill is about. And if we can help some of those students get a better education, that's what we need to be doing. That's what this bill's focused on, not what certain people, how certain people have changed the conversation. Let's help those kids in failing schools.
So I would echo what Ken just said about, I would push back on the overwhelming opposition to this. I've gotten emails, gotten phone calls from my constituents, both for and against, and I wouldn't know where to put that now, probably pretty close to even. But in the House, as Representative Brink was saying, we've divided it up. And so we've got the Student First scholarships, we've got the charter school piece, and then we've got everything else. The charter school piece and the Student First scholarships, those are set for subcommittee next week. And we'll see what happens at the subcommittee. I mean, that's the way the process works. We see who shows up for and against. We take into consideration what we hear back from our constituents and make a decision based on that. A couple of things, too, I would point out about the charter schools. They really have been part or not part of the conversation. I hear a lot, about pushing back about, these private charter schools. Charter schools in Iowa are public schools. They cannot deny anybody if they don't have space. They have to go to a lottery system. I think that's a big misconception. They're also not a partisan issue when you see them across the country. I think Governor Andrew Cuomo has been in favor of them. Actually, opposite of Mayor Bill de Blasio. They got in a little bit of a heated fight over them. And so I think we really need to have that conversation and just see where it goes. But I would, like Ken said, push back on the overwhelming opposition. I don't think that's true.
And I do want to add something. When we're talking about these 34 failing schools, 32 of those schools have been underperforming for more than 3 years. And some of them they're performing at a 27% proficiency. And so we really do need to, if we want to do what's best for kids, I mean, again, give us some other solutions. I mean, we're just trying to find solutions because these kids do deserve a future. They do deserve an education. And we need to do the best we can for them and give them opportunities. But yeah, it only deals with the 34 schools and approximately 9,000 students that may have the opportunity.
All right. Well, we have a question from Jenny Keogh. And if I can get my phone to work right here. Can we have an update on the bottle bill? Do you know if the plastic bottles and glass are actually being recycled or reused by the bottlers? And she follows up with that with the question about, if the bottles are being rinsed, have we looked at the environmental impact and if they're being cleaned or what have you, then are they just still making their way to the landfill or what's going on with them?
Well, I said in committee on Wednesday that this bottle bill was not on my bucket list of things to do in the Capitol. But I've been there for 9 years. Every year I've watched discussions and bills come and go about the bottle bill. Everybody knows it's a popular program. Everyone knows that it is in dire need of an update. And so we fight the same battles every year. And I decided to try to change the discussion by offering something significantly different this year. And I could get in the weeds far more than I should here right now, but the bottom line is this. The bottle bill, this bill that I've dropped is focused on one thing, and that's to start to rejuvenate the Redemption Center business around Iowa. We are going to increase the handling fee, and we are going to remove the mandate that grocers or other retailers return those bottles and cans to their store. I think given a year now of dealing with a pandemic, we should have a heightened awareness of the problem with bringing that used empty bottles back into the same place where we buy our food, or into a convenience store where a lot of food is purchased as well. So I am intentionally staying away from some of those discussions, like is 5-cent deposit enough? Should we be including plastic? The difference with my bill is it takes the bottler clear out of the equation. The nickel deposit never goes to the bottler. The nickel deposit goes to ABD, which is the Alcoholic Beverage Division, state of Iowa. They're used to handling this type of thing. They will collect the nickels and they will reimburse the nickels to the redemption centers. And part of the problem is the unredeemed nickels, right? The nickel that was paid but is never returned to the consumer. Under my bill, those unclaimed nickels will eventually go back to the taxpayer trust fund. So the people of Iowa get those nickels back instead of going into a black hole somewhere. The people are making money on this. The worse the bottle bill performed, the lower the redemption rates, the more nickels that are being collected in the pockets of a few people.
Just an example of, sometimes we get focused on what's going on our side. Wasn't aware of your bill, Ken, but it sounds like a pretty good bill to me.
All right, we have a question from Optima Life Services. It says, thank you, legislators, for your participation in today's Facebook forum and your service to our neighbors in the Mahaska County area. If the Health and Human Services appropriation bills late in the session include support for wage increases to direct care staff, which Governor Reynolds proposed in her state budget, can we count on your support for the measure?
Fully aware of direct support pay. It's not good. In concept, absolutely, I agree with that. We have budget, but I'm on the Appropriations Committee. I will always try to support anything that will help our direct care workers.
Yeah, to echo what Ken said, the budget is a big process. I'm not on any of the budget committees, so certainly if it comes before the House and that's what has been fixed in the budget, I certainly would support it.
It's in the same. It depends on how it fits into the budget and if we can make it work. Absolutely.
All right, this one's for Ken Rosenboom. It's from Louise Eswald. Ken Rosenboom, what other states had any substantial voter fraud that was not thrown out by the courts?
Ken, could you repeat that?
Sure, I'll do. It asks, what other states had any substantiated voter fraud that was not thrown out by the courts?
Well, okay, I'll point to one very significant one. In the Constitution of the United States, it is established that the state legislatures shall establish election law in each respective state. In Pennsylvania, many people outside of the legislature changed a lot of rules, a lot of voting law. There were mail-in ballots which are not provided for in state law. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a judge. I know a direct violation of the Constitution when I see one, and that was one. The courts wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole because the courts do not like to get involved in an election dispute or election spat. But I think it's indisputable, with my example in the state of Pennsylvania, that the state legislature's rules were ignored and a lot of votes were cast that were technically, at the very least, inappropriate, illegal. I don't know if they were, if the vote count was altered or not. I suspect it was. I can't prove that. But the point is, the voting laws of the state of Pennsylvania were not followed, and the courts did nothing about it.
All right, we have a question here from Donna Crookham. The new voting law says absentee ballots must be delivered to the auditor by the voter, a relative, or a caretaker. How is an elderly person supposed to vote who must vote absentee, cannot deliver their ballot, does not have a close-by relative, and does not have a caretaker? Also, how are county auditors to know if a person delivering a ballot is a caretaker or a relative?
So that part of the law was to prevent ballot harvesting, and so I would point out that first off, the U.S. mail system is a completely appropriate way to turn in absentee ballots, and the term caretaker is broadly defined. We believe will be broadly interpreted, and if you follow the debate on the House floor, there was a commitment from the floor manager of the bill that if that needs to be better defined to make sure that somebody like Donna was talking about has an appropriate person to deliver that ballot, then he was certainly willing to do it, and I would be as well.
Yeah, just as Dustin said, Representative Kaufman did say that there's going to be a technical bill with a few things, and while he believes the verbiage in there, after talking with a few lawyers, that it was pretty explainable. If we need to make some technical issues, it'll be in the tech bill that'll be coming here soon.
All right, we have a question from Megan Schur. What are the rainy day funds and the taxpayers trust fund for if they are not to be used for a year like this past year? Why not use those to support businesses and the people of our state?
It's been a tough year for everyone. We know that. And it impacted state budgets. But because I believe our responsible budgeting practices the last few years, Iowa's in excellent shape from an economic standpoint. We're seeing growth in Iowa. The Council of State Governments commissioned a nationwide study to determine the impact of the pandemic on state budgets. Iowa was rated as the state best prepared to deal with the pandemic. So for those of us old enough to remember a farm crisis of 30 years ago, or other really tough times, we could be, or even more recently in 2009 and 10, that recession, there are times where we will have to use those funds, but we want them to be there when we really need them. So I think the state's performed well economically despite the problems thrown at us. And in our judgment, we are in good shape. We're funding education better than we did. We're raising the funding for that. So I think it's a little hard to argue that we just need to dip into taxpayer trust fund or rainy day funds to do something that we feel we're doing very well and very responsibly right now.
So the taxpayer trust fund is actually to return tax dollars to unspent tax dollars to taxpayers. But with regard to the rainy day funds, those automatically get paid back next year. And so again, the state of Iowa is doing well. Unemployment's low. The federal government is also kicking in a lot of money. And so what we do not want to be is in a position where we spend those this year. They have to be paid back next year, and all of a sudden we have a even larger budget shortfall, and we just don't want to be in that position.
I'd actually like to follow up, since the U.S. Congress last night voted a $1.9 trillion COVID relief package, only a small part of which actually goes to COVID relief. That bill, if the Senate would pass that, we are passing on generational debt to our children in the pursuit of $100 million bridges in New York that have nothing to do with COVID, and many other egregious examples of pork barrel projects. So given the choice between responsible budgeting and spending versus this reckless budgeting practices we're seeing in Washington, I'll pick our way every time.
All right, we have another question that says, have you submitted or passed any legislation helping cities or public schools in regard to expenses experienced due to COVID? And that's from Susie Card.
So I started off my comment, Susie, maybe you weren't here or weren't online at that point, but the House has kicked out $27.2 million of added funding for schools that had kids in person. We also added in schools that were affected by the derecho, because while they may not have had COVID costs, they did have certainly other expenses. So that has been passed out of the Iowa House. It goes into effect if it's passed and signed by the governor. Immediately, those funds would be available immediately for schools, and they could carry them over to next year if they did not need to spend them this year. So yes, in the House, we've done exactly that.
And I want the public to know that in addition to that, which we all support, the federal government, through the CARES Act, provided significant funding for our schools. And I did a little search this week across the state. My district versus Des Moines. Des Moines School District receives $1,300 per student, federal money, to respond to CARES Act. And, of course, they didn't open the classroom until recently. Oskaloosa is in the $800 $700 to $800. Pella got $182 per student per year. So there were significant funds from the federal government that were also put into our schools to help them open. And I keep still hearing stories about a lot of that original CARES stimulus package that still has not been spent on behalf of the schools.
So follow up from Megan is, what are instances that you guys would want to use a rainy day fund? What would want? Okay, I'm going to start over again. I seem to have tongue tied here. What are instances they would want to use a rainy day fund? So I'm assuming they being you. So.
Well, again, I think it's something where it truly is disastrous for the state. The state of Iowa is doing pretty well now. Unemployment is back down to very low levels, and so this isn't it. We'd have to see what comes along, but again, the state of Iowa is doing pretty well, and so I don't think that it makes sense to spend that money that has to be paid back next year.
And I think we also have to remember, it wasn't that we didn't pull any type of extra funds. We had our emergency funds that we were using, and numerous times, we've dipped into there and used that type of money. So we still had money left over there as well. And so I don't think we needed to quite get to that extreme, and we don't know the future. We are back moving quicker than, we kind of originally thought, and that's a great thing. And the best part is we didn't have to use that, and we're improving. And so I think the right decisions were made.
And I think I touched on two of those with my previous answer. The downturn, economic downturn in the 2008, 2009. I wasn't in the legislature there, but certainly those things could have been looked at. As I recall, the governor back then, Chet Culver, cut funding to the schools, 10% across the board cut. I think it would have been nice to have used a rainy day fund to fill that gap. And then for those of us that are old enough to remember the farm crisis in the mid-1980s, Iowa's budget was in a shambles then. So I understand the temptation to spend rainy day funds every time it gets cloudy, but I think those two examples illustrate where we should be using that money.
So Mike Strasko asks, is it a direct conflict with the Constitution to give public money to religious and private unregulated schools?
No. One of the great programs in this state is the Iowa Tuition Grant that goes to our private colleges, goes to William Penn and Central College in my district, and Senator Rosenboom's district. Again, religious-based organizations. It's been done for, I don't know how long that's been in place, almost 50 years, I believe.
Yeah, we actually celebrated the 50th anniversary of that a year or two ago. So yes, there's been public money going to private students in private schools. But I have to take issue with the way the question was posed. This money isn't going to those schools. This money would go to the families, to the student. The money follows the student. It isn't going to a particular school. Just as with the Iowa Tuition Grant, that goes to a student. It doesn't go to a school. Same is true here.
All right, and I think this one's kind of a keyholes into it. Louise Esveld asks, it appears that HSB 242 and HSB 243 will filter away a portion of my tax dollars to the benefit of private schools outside our accountability system and for the benefit of a few private citizens. How can you reassure me and our taxpayers that our dollars will not be used to benefit entities that deny access to or discriminate against minority, disabled, LGBTQ students? How can you reassure me that these charter schools and private schools that enroll students with these scholarships are fully compliant with Iowa law and academic standards?
Just as we talked a little bit ago, the charter schools are public schools. It's the capacity issue. We went over that, and it's possible the lottery system after that. And when it comes to the other side, this doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go to a private school either. There's a lot of programs that it can go to. It can go to one of the online programs. It can go to a special program for a school. So people, again, are just lumping it into money's going to go to a private school that does this. That's not necessarily the case. And so I encourage everyone to look into the bill and really read it because that's not necessarily how that's going to work. Every school has standards they have to work by, and so I think that's the other important thing. But the most important thing is, are we doing an injustice to these children who are not getting the education that they deserve or need? 27% proficiency is one of the schools. So how do we help those students? Many of them are in the 30%. 43% is a couple of them. But these schools have, for more than 3 years, 32 out of the 34 for more than 3 years, have been unproficient. So how do we help these kids?
I'm just going to make one quick comment, and I'll hand it on to Dustin. One thing that's been lost here, it seems, these students would have to be enrolled in an accredited school. These are not, there's some disparaging remarks made about these schools, but these schools are accredited for teaching our kids in Iowa. And if you've ever been part of a private school that I've been part of and on the board, you recognize the questions about accountability, frankly, from my perspective, are somewhat silly, because there's no one more accountable to schools than parents and the parents that are running a school.
And then I would just circle back around on the charter piece. And I'm assuming, I don't know numbers of bills off the top of my head, but I assume this is the Student First Scholarship and the charter school bill. But as to the charter schools, the governor's bill and what one of these would do was actually strengthen the supervision over charter schools, make them directly reportable to the Department of Ed, give the Department of Ed a little bit of more ability to maybe dissolve the school if it's not doing what it's supposed to. But again, I think the other thing that we are looking at is parental choice. And the market. The parents choose the school that they think is best, and if it doesn't work out for their student, they're going to go somewhere else.
And I don't think we brought it up today. I want the public to know that in some of these schools, we have open enrollment at Iowa, and a lot of parents in this area utilize that opportunity to send their child to a different school. That is a school choice. But in some of our schools, because of diversity requirements that the school boards have put in place, there are children absolutely trapped, blocked in those schools. They don't have the opportunity to an open roll out of Oskaloosa to North Mahaska or vice versa. They don't have a chance to go anywhere. They're trapped, and they're failing, or the schools are failing. So I just encourage the public to focus on what we're really trying to do here, instead of focusing on pejorative terms and disparaging other people.
All right, and I heard one of you folks talk about deer this morning when we were milling them out getting ready, and actually in Oskaloosa yesterday there was a traffic accident in front of the newspaper's office that involved a car and a deer and an injury, which seems to be happening more and more in Iowa. So can we talk about, we're always told that there's a great economic impact. We get much tourism dollars because of the deer population. Can we talk about how that deer population, which seems to be having disease problems now, but how that economic impact to the plus is balanced against the negative, health impacts from people being hurt and killed, and or the extra car insurance that's needed because of, we're second highest in the nation.
Thanks for the question. Holly and I have Appaloosa and Monroe counties in our district, and if you think the numbers are high here, they're higher down there. I have been on the Natural Resource Environment Committee for this my 9th year. I've worked closely with the DNR, had questions about this every year, and frankly, we don't seem to be making any progress. So I filed Senate File 427 a couple of weeks ago, and it does a number of things. Number one, it addresses some of the silly penalties that were associated with this. For instance, if you took a shot at an antlerless deer illegally, and you had to reimburse the state $1,500, the same as you would if you shot a swan or a crane. And by the way, if you shot an endangered species, it was only a $1,000 penalty. Well, that's way out of whack. So we're correcting that. We are also, the DNR has what's called a depredation program where they work with landowners. Landowners have told me for years it's a joke, so we're taking a hard look at that, how we can be more effectively get rid of deer antlerless deer at the appropriate time to reduce the population. And probably the most important thing in the bill is calls to the DNR to conduct, to do an environmental impact assessment of overpopulation of deer, and also to do a economic impact assessment. But they can't do that in a vacuum. They can't use their own people. They are going to have to contract with the Iowa State University, with the Department of Transportation, and with the insurance division, the insurance people, so we can get a broader view of deer populations and how they impact not just hunters and that sort of thing, but how they impact each one of us.
All righty. Well, we have just a few minutes left, so I would like to give this opportunity for you guys to make any closing statements and or any other items for housekeeping purposes.
Again, just thank you for joining us. Remember, you can always email us, call us, or come join us at the Capitol. We do appreciate your feedback, ideas, and questions. That's what we're here for, is to represent you. This next week is going to be another very busy week. I know I have a government oversight hearing on Tuesday at 8:30. Looking into some curriculum concerns, and so I'll be, quite busy with that. But you guys can always log on and watch us online. All of our subcommittees and hearings and stuff are live. So if you do have questions or concerns about bills, I encourage you to get on and sometimes learn the whys and listen to the conversation. So just thank you for your time today.
Yeah, I repeat that. Thank you. But, as I sit here and listen to these questions that you throw at us today, what I'd encourage everyone that has an interest in this, you can always go onto the Iowa Legislature website. You can watch all that we do on the floor live, or it's all archived. So if you want to have, for instance, if you want to hear the debate on these school bills, you can hear the full House debate, the full Senate debate. You'll probably get a much broader perspective of the pros and cons of these. And on a personal basis, because Amy Sinclair chairs the Education Committee in the Senate, her closing remarks on these bills are always very powerful and very educational. I think a lot of your questions would be answered.
I want to thank the sponsors of this, Ken and Ginger, and I think Andy and Allison are behind the scenes making sure all this is working today. So certainly thank you all, and just echo their concerns. Email, call, come to the Capitol, let us know you're coming. But hopefully, again, next year we can be in person and back with you all. So thank you, everybody.
All righty, we're going to work on closing this out. I'd really like to thank our guests for coming in today. I know that it's never easy when you're on the hot seat to be here. We'd like to thank Midwest One for providing the Smoky Road coffee for this morning. I think everybody's enjoyed that so far. To Andy and Allison McGuire, who've been texting me your questions as I try and run the camera controls. And we'd also like to thank the Mahaska Chamber of Development Group for being the sponsor of Eggs and Issues. This has probably been one of the best known political forums in the state of Iowa for some time. Unfortunately, this year it's a little different, but maybe next year we'll be back in the confines of Smoky Row. I'd like to thank Penn Central Mall for hosting both the KIC and Oski News studio here within Penn Central Mall. And once again, I'd really appreciate the legislators for being here today. We look forward to seeing you here for Eggs and Issues on Saturday, March 13th. And I believe we may have Mahaska Health here, and we're talking about the vaccine again at that one. We'll have this trio here again on March 27th at 8:30 a.m. And for Ken Alsup, I'm Ken Alsup, and for Oskaloosa News, and we'll look forward to seeing you here soon.